Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever looked out of an airplane window and suddenly felt like, for just a brief moment, you are understanding the universe just a little bit better? Well, today, we're following an author who experienced exactly that. We're going to unpack how a pretty routine journey through freezing weather and pitch black skies actually provided this brilliant framework for understanding faith, enduring hardship, and finding that unwavering light hiding right behind life's darkest clouds.
So let's kick things off with a beautifully atmospheric quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's classic novel Night Flight. It reads, "The plains brightened, but it is a light that never changes." The author of our source material actually remembered this exact passage during their own journey, and honestly, it sets the absolute perfect stage for our exploration today. Just like the pilot in Saint-Exupéry's story finds a moment of quiet reflection up there in the vastness of the sky, the author uses the isolation of a flight to pause and really observe the hidden truths of the world below us.
All right, Section 1, the blue sky beyond clouds. Let's trace the author's physical journey. It starts on a really crisp early winter morning, boarding a daytime flight out of Hamilton, heading to Winnipeg to visit an old, deeply respected pastor friend.
Now picture this. Shortly after takeoff, the pilot comes over the intercom to announce the weather at their destination. The temperature? A freezing -35 degrees Celsius, which, by the way, with the wind chill felt like -52. But then, without missing a beat, the pilot cheerfully adds, "It's good weather." And of course, that brings this huge burst of shared laughter to the entire cabin. It's just a wonderful, lighthearted moment that reminds us how much our perception of good depends entirely on how we choose to look at things.
And that little joke actually hits the nail on the head for the core metaphor the author noticed while looking out the window. Down below, the ground was completely covered by this thick, chaotic blanket of shifting clouds. Big ones, dark ones, fluffy ones. But just shifting their gaze slightly upward, past that horizon line of clouds, the sky was an absolute, unbroken, perfect blue. It's a striking visual paradox, right? Underneath is this chaotic mix of weather, but up above, it's pure serenity.
And this is where it gets really profound. When we look up from the ground, we usually only see those dark, shifting clouds, right? We just assume the sky is gray today. But the blue sky doesn't actually go away. It's simply hidden. Just as that blue sky remains the constant, unmoving foundation behind all the crazy weather, God's grace and presence are the unchanging foundations of our lives. Even when the clouds of hardship completely block our view and life feels super gloomy, that unwavering blue sky of grace is literally always there, wrapping around us.
Moving on to Section 2, suffering that comes to life. Let's fast forward to the return trip, where the whole visual narrative completely shifts. After a really warm 5-day visit, the author boards an evening flight to head back home. Now, looking out the window on this flight, totally different story. No fluffy clouds, no blue skies, just a pitch-black night flight over the vast, completely unlit plains of Canada. There wasn't a single light visible down on the ground. And staring into that intense, physical darkness naturally prompted the author to turn inward, reflecting on the dark, incredibly difficult times we all inevitably face. Those external shadows basically became a mirror for internal struggles.
Staring out into that void kind of forces you to lean in and ask that heavy, universally painful question. When inexplicable hardships just suddenly tear our lives apart, we all eventually ask, why? Why is this happening to me? Even if you have a rock-solid foundation of faith, suffering is incredibly disorienting. It shakes us to our core and demands answers that, let's be honest, we rarely ever get.
And the author doesn't sugarcoat this harsh reality at all. There are almost never satisfying, clear-cut answers to why pain strikes when it does. That lack of understanding, it causes deep despair. Navigating your way out of that emotional darkness is like walking through an endlessly long, exhausting tunnel. Tragically, the sheer weight of that journey leads some people to just give up entirely. The author openly confesses that they too still grapple with these deeply unanswered questions. Which brings us to Section 3, the suffering of Jesus Christ. Because even in the midst of all that overwhelming darkness, the author finds a profound anchor by shifting focus away from their own questions and toward the suffering experienced by Jesus. Think about it like this. Suffering isn't necessarily just a sign of failure or being abandoned. The completely sinless Son of God suffered tremendously. He literally had no reason to endure pain for his own sake, yet he took on that immense suffering to reconcile humanity with God. Without that incredibly dark period of suffering, our future would be entirely closed off in despair, but instead, that pain opened up a future absolutely filled with hope.
This perfectly ties into a really powerful quote from the Apostle Paul in Philippians 1:29. Paul writes that it has been granted to us not only to believe, but also to suffer. As the author points out, suffering isn't a glitch in the system. It's actually deeply intertwined with grace. If the perfectly sinless Son of God went through such profound pain, well, our own suffering in this broken world is kinda to be expected. Paul basically accepted suffering as just a natural responsibility of living out a life of faith.
All right, Section 4, the dark night of the soul. This leads us to a fascinating theological concept about how faith and suffering actually coexist day to day. We all kind of want faith to be this invisible shield that repels the bad stuff, right? But history paints a much more nuanced picture.
Enter the 16th century Spanish monk Saint John of the Cross. He talked about this deeply profound concept called the dark night of the soul. He understood that the human soul naturally goes through cycles. Just like the earth has day and night, the soul has periods of vibrant, amazing light and periods of deep, profound darkness. It's essentially the natural ecosystem of our spiritual lives.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, the author emphasizes that faith is absolutely not a magic pill. It's not some quick cure that exempts you from pain or tragedy. Instead, going through these dark nights of the soul is a shared, universal reality. Everyone faces the dark. The real difference isn't the absence of the dark, but rather who you're walking through it with.
And that leads right into our final section, the narrow path to life. As we near the end of our explainer, we see how the author pulls all these reflections together into a defining decision about how we navigate the inevitable pain of life.
There's a really strict sequence here. You literally cannot skip to the end. True life, resurrection, deep spiritual renewal, these are gifts that can only be reached by first passing through step 1, the reality of suffering, and those metaphorical deaths we all go through. The brilliant light of resurrection is only really fully realized after you've navigated the darkness.
Because of this, we are all standing at a critical crossroads. Do we choose the wide path? Sure, it's easy, it tries to dodge all the pain and discomfort, but ultimately, it totally lacks the depth of true resurrection. Or do we bravely choose the narrow path? It's tough, it absolutely requires carrying heavy burdens, and yeah, suffering comes with the territory. But it is the one and only road that leads to genuine life and lasting hope.
Bringing it all back home, the plane finally touches down safely in Hamilton. Stepping off the flight into the cold, the author is suddenly hit with this deep, overwhelming longing to see their family. And in that warm moment against the winter chill, they realize something so beautiful. It is God's constant grace, that unchanging blue sky, that actually gives us the courage to keep walking that narrow, difficult path. That grace is always there holding us up, even on the days we completely lose sight of it.
So, wrapping up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. When you wake up tomorrow and look at the hardships that might be obscuring your sky, how are you going to choose to see them? Are you going to let yourself be consumed by those dark, shifting clouds? Or will you have the courage to remember that just beyond them, that unwavering, brilliantly blue sky of grace is right there waiting for you? Keep looking up, and thanks so much for hanging out with me today.